أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغر الميامين المظلومين، سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا، مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة، الحجة ابن الحسن العسكري فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم وهب لنا رأفته ورحمته وعونه ودعاءه وخيره ورضاه، ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك يا كريم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. My dear brothers and respected sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If we were to take a look at the different phases that the first 250 years after the revelation of the religion of Islam went through, we would find that by far the most difficult and most traumatic was that of the time of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. One can of course argue that the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen was incredibly strenuous. The time of Imam al-Hasan was also a period marred by discord and wars and fitna, to the extent that the Imam was only the ruler for 6 months, such that Wahhabi scholars don't even count him as a Khalifa. So when they're trying to list the number of Khulafa and somehow attempting to pick 12 individuals so that they could satisfy the hadith of the Holy Prophet, who said that things in my nation will be relatively calm, the nation will be guided and free from trouble as long as we have 12 khulafa. So in an attempt to try and list 12 khulafa, they don't even include Imam al-Hasan in the list. One could argue that the period of Imam al-Husayn's imamah was incredibly difficult. It doesn't get much worse than the end of that period, which was the catastrophe of Karbala, the tragedy of Ashura. And if you go further down the list and you look at the lives of subsequent imams, such as Imam al-Jawad, Imam al-Hadi, Imam al-Askari, again, the trials of those phases, the pains, the excruciating difficulties that the nation went through was indescribable. And yet, the phase in which Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was God's vicegerent was even more difficult. And there are reasons for that, which I'll try to elaborate on. The first one is that after a period when the three Khulafa had ruled, so much damage was inflicted on the religion of Islam was such that Amir al-Mu'mineen, when speaking to Malik al-Ashtar in his famous letter of appointment, the Imam says to him that you need to take into account the fact that Islam had been hijacked. Usira, the Imam calls how he describes this transition, this situation. He says that al-Islamu usira fi aidi al-ashrar. It had been taken as captive. Islam had been kidnapped. Islam had been hijacked. By who? By the most wicked people. This is in Ahd al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen ila Malik al-Ashtar. It's in Nahj al-Balagh. أسر الإسلام في أيدي الأشرار. How? The Imam says, يعمل فيه بالهوى وتطلب به الدنيا. He says that Islam had become just a mere tool for those who are seeking pleasure in this world, whether it be money, authority. This dunya was being sought through Islam. In other words, when you examine the period prior to Amir al-Mu'mineen's Khilafah, you find Islam being practiced everywhere. Even during the time of Muawiyah. And even for the Khulafa after Yazid, alayhi la'inullah, Islam was being practiced. The congregational prayers were always filled to capacity. Hajj was always crowded. But the reason that was done is because the government, the authorities, the regime, they saw the absence of an individual from Salat al-Jum'ah, for example, from a security lens. If you didn't show up, it meant that you opposed the regime. So imagine the amount of damage that would have been inflicted on the message of Islam, the core of Islam, during that phase. Then you come closer to the time of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and the period in which he was God's divine appointee, the vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what you find is something that is reminiscent of what we see today. Which is why, and I want the dear brothers and sisters to think about this. The fact that we now see people diverging and becoming distant from religion is very similar to what Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam experienced in his imamah. This sense of moral degradation, the fact that people are leaving religion or at least becoming disinterested or uninterested in practicing their faith. These are all things that Imam al-Sajjad experienced. He witnessed all of this. This is nothing new. Obviously, we know that religion, just like the economy, just like every other thing in this life, is cyclical. It goes through cycles. There are ups and downs in the chart. What we're experiencing today is a downward cycle, very similar to the time of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Which is why, if we're going to face these challenges today, we need to study the life of Imam Zayn al-Abidin and the context in which the Imam operated in order to address the challenges we find in the contemporary world. So again, keep this in mind. If we were going to pick an Imam who was going to provide us with answers to these questions, it would be Imam al-Sajjad. Because his time, his era, his period was marred by moral degradation, by people feeling disconnected from religion. There was a sense of hopelessness. There was an economic uptick at the time which made a lot of people very wealthy. And so all of these things contributed to a society that was anything but religious. In spite of the fact, as we said, that mosques were always full. People prayed, they practiced religion out in the open. But in reality, there was an incident narrated in books such as Tarikh al-Tabari and others, that a concert was held. Obviously now we call it a concert. Back then it was just a singer coming to town. A concert was held in Basra, and the youth of Medina traveled from Medina to Basra in order to attend the concert. Imagine, this is barely 50, 60 years after Rasulullah. And people would travel these vast distances just so they could watch someone sing. A woman, no less. Things were so bad at one point that they would bring slaves to sell in the open market. And by the way, the slave trade flourished after the first three khulafa. And the reason for that was because of all the conquests. They called it jihad, or as the scholars refer to it as jihad ibtida'i, which is when you initiate a war, a conquest against a neighboring country or region or tribe. They called it jihad because they had to put a religious facade over it. Otherwise, it was very simply a means of acquiring the wealth of that country. They were not interested in spreading Islam by any means. And so this quote-unquote jihad was a means of conquest and occupation. Of course, a byproduct of that, we're trying to improve the country's economic situation. We have poverty, for example. People are becoming, they're growing resentful towards their public officials, the Khalifa and his family, especially during the time of Uthman. Everyone knows that the family, those closest to him, became wealthy overnight. They were seen around in public. Like, imagine now if you see somebody driving a Lamborghini, how do you feel about that? The first question you ask is, look, I knew this guy before. He was not wealthy. He doesn't come from a wealthy family. What happened? How did he get his money? Back then, imagine suddenly you had the wives of Rasulullah, as you do today when you have like a public official, there are motorcades, right? You see many, many cars and security guards and whatnot to make sure that this convoy is safe. But part of it is the spectacle. Part of it is the idea that I'm not a regular person. I'm not your average Joe. I'm someone who's special. I'm somehow related to Rasulullah. And so a wife of Rasulullah would walk around with a convoy of camels and 200 people. So this materialism began to take shape, with money being brought in from the conquests, with people becoming wealthier and more affluent, what happens? People turn to entertainment. They want joy, they want pleasure, and they'll do anything to get it. Because again, imagine traveling from Medina to Basra is a trip, a journey that takes months. And so for someone to do that means that they'd have to have the means. They'd have to have the wealth. They'd have to have essentially a great degree of boredom. In other words, these people weren't working. They didn't have a 9 to 5. They just had a lot of money that they felt they should spend in order to acquire as much pleasure as possible. Then comes Imam al-Sajjad, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajal faraja. And he's dealing with a number of different things. On the one hand, there's a tyrannical regime that is in power, starting with Yazid himself. The Imam does not follow the path that was chosen by his father, Imam al-Hussein, because he was commanded not to. At-tariq, this is in the hadith known as the hadith of Lawh, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides specific instructions to each of the Imams. The one that pertains to Imam al-Sajjad contains this commandment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At-tariq wasmut. وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Lower your head, be quiet, and worship your Lord until death comes, until you depart this world. The Imam had to follow this strategy in order to address these problems. The first one, as I said, the most despotic, the most tyrannical, the most vicious individuals at the helm of the government, starting with Yazid, then Marwan, then Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, then a series of individuals, each one of them, by the way. Marwan himself only ruled for about a year, but then his son ruled for 10 years, and his son after that ruled for another 10 years. So you can imagine about 25 years or more, Bani Marwan are in charge. The Imam has to deal with that at a time when the Imam's every movement was being scrutinized. They would literally go to Medina seeking to arrest the Imam. Imam al-Sajjad had to live out in the desert like a Bedouin in order to safeguard himself and his family and to continue the mission. Imagine living out there in the desert, in tents. So that's one of the major challenges the Imam was faced with. The other challenge was this social, moral pandemic that had plagued society back then. The fact that people are simply not interested in religion anymore. And so how does the Imam bring them back into the fold? How does he educate them? How does he train them? He does so through his worship. In other words, he led by example. Instead of preaching to them, because again, remember, the Imam was not even known publicly. And I'll get to that point a little later. The Imam did not have any status or position in society, let alone politics. People didn't recognize him. In fact, hadiths say that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam would go to Hajj every year and he would go with a group that doesn't recognize him. لا يعرفون. How would someone not know Ali ibn al-Husayn, Zayn al-Abidin? But this tells you that people in those times simply didn't recognize him. The Imam kept his head low. In fact, I'll mention this hadith because it's interesting. So the Imam went with a caravan or a group that didn't recognize him. And the reason for that is because he would make a condition. He would stipulate that I will join you if you let me serve you. So he would simply serve the Hujjaj. And the hadith says, this is by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that the Imam would join them and he would just be like another servant. If somebody wants water, he'll bring him water. If someone wants food, if someone needs to carry some luggage around. So much so that at one point, someone recognized the Imam. He was from another group. He came, he noticed him, so he went to the group that the Imam was traveling with, and he said to them, "Do you know who this is? Who carries your luggage for you? Who cleans up after you eat your food? This is Zainul Abidin, Ali ibn al-Hussein." So they came to him and apologized. They said to him, "We didn't know who you were. We wish you had told us." So the Imam said to him, "No, I would never tell you, because the last time I went with a group, with a caravan, and they recognized me, أعطوني برسول الله ما لا أستحق." They treated me in such a manner that because of my connection, because of my relationship with the Holy Prophet, they gave me a special treatment. And I don't deserve that, even though the Imam deserves everything there is to give. And yet, his humility is such that he says, "I don't want to be given any special treatment because of my ancestry that traces its way back to Rasulullah. So leave me. Allow me to serve you. Allow me to just be with you and spend time without you rolling the red carpet for me." The Imam was dealing with this issue, which is that on the one hand, he's targeted by the regime. On the other hand, people don't even recognize him. So who's going to help him? So what he does is he leads by example. We don't have any, as far as I can tell anyway, there's not a single report that anyone came to Imam al-Sajjad and asked him for a fatwa, asked him a question that has to do with jurisprudence. Imagine. We don't have any incident where people would pray behind Imam Zain al-Abidin. So he's not even recognized or acknowledged as a leader of Salat al-Jama'ah. So the Imam, instead of preaching to them, he led by example. He gave them treasures, priceless gems of wisdom. I was reading the Confessions of Saint Augustine. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but Saint Augustine, a very influential figure in Christianity and Catholicism, he has a book called The Confessions. And it's basically an autobiography, but also it's a book of prayers and supplications. I would read this and then go back to skimming through As-Sahif As-Sajjadiyya and think to myself, we have not shown any appreciation to the treasures that have been passed down to us from Imam As-Sajjad. Had the world seen, had the world been exposed to the Sahifa of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, the world would be a completely different place. Atheism, agnosticism, this complete moral degradation would not exist the way it does if people were exposed to the teachings and supplications of Imam As-Sajjad. I've read the Psalms of David, right? It's an annex to the Bible. You have the Old Testament, the New Testament, and you have the Psalms. Read the Psalms of David. Take a quick look. Part of which, we have no doubt, was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it was revealed to a different community. It was revealed to people with limited mental capacities. Then come and read what Imam As-Sajjad has given us and gifted us. It is tragic and heartbreaking, to say the very least, that we are still, the Sahifa itself is foreign to us. We have yet to discover what the Sahifa can offer. There are moral teachings. There are theological discussions. I mean, Dua Abu Hamza alone, that we read in the holy month of Ramadan. Notice how the Imam speaks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the way he addresses the creator of the universe. How everything subtly falls into place and you recognize your inherent and intrinsic weakness and poverty just by reading these lines. And he's not teaching you anything new. He's just reminding you of the fact that we are nothing but creatures that were brought into existence by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our need and poverty to the Creator is absolutely intrinsic. You read a dua like that, and there's no room for hubris or arrogance, because you realize who you really are. In the Sahifa, which I won't talk about tonight, inshallah we'll have more time to discuss it later, but you have a hadith about praying for your neighbor, for example, praying for your parents, your children. You have a hadith that highlight the role and significance and position of the Alulbayt and God's vicegerents. Du'as that highlight this. You have du'as that curse the tyrants and enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this whole discussion about cursing, is this allowed, is this not allowed? Read Sahifa Sajjadi and you'll see. You even have prayers that protect you against black magic and negative interference by the jinn and things like that. Just the other day, someone sent me a message saying that my child, my infant, has some kind of, I think she mentioned lactose intolerance, something like that. Now, for an infant, lactose intolerance is not good. And because the child, the infant survives on his mother's milk. So she said that my in-laws are saying that we should go and get a talisman from a pir in some Sufi shrine in Pakistan. And they're forcing me to do this. They're saying that if you don't follow the teachings of the pir, which is like, the sage, if you don't follow his teachings, if you don't believe in him, then you don't believe in the miracles of the Ahlul Bayt. I said, how did you go from A to B? If you don't believe any fraudster, any charlatan who says that I can do something to alleviate your problem or to address your issues, then you don't believe in God or the prophets or the Ahlul Bayt? I said, absolutely don't go anywhere near that. We have du'as in Sahifa Sajjadiyah. Read those. This is the right way to approach things. And what a terrible situation we're in right now. Whether it be in countries like Iraq, there's a pandemic of black magic. It is absolutely disgusting how many people resort to these tactics. Black magic of all different kinds and types being used. A woman who has a problem with her husband tries a few of these tricks, and the hope, what she's been promised, is that your husband will love you again. And vice versa. Any issue that we face, suddenly the first person we think of is this old lady who reads a cup, or she can write something and give me a talisman, give me some kind of cure. If we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected his religion and completed his message, and if we believe when Rasulullah said, إِنِّي تَارِكُمْ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَعِتْرَتِي أَهْلَ بَيْتِي مَا إِن تَمَسَّكْتُمْ بِهِمَا لَن تَضِلُّوا بَعْدِي أَبَدًا وَقَدْ نَبَّأَنِي اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ أَنَّهُمَا لَن يَفْتَرِقَا حَتَّى يَرِدَا عَلَيَّ الْحَوْض. He's given you the full formula. Rasulullah has given us everything we need. The Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. Read the Quran. Try and understand it. Try and apply it. Follow the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. And you have nothing to worry about. Black magic. It's an entire industry that's been built to exploit vulnerable people who are in need and who are less intelligent than average, unfortunately, I'd have to say. Exploiting them, using them, and giving them the wrong medicine. Imagine someone who has cancer and you tell them that your medicine is to drink salt water from somewhere. Not only is it disingenuous and dishonest and wrong and immoral, but it won't solve the problem. You're misdiagnosing the problem, let alone giving them the right medications and medical instructions. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam provides du'as to address this. And so the Imam leads by example, such that he becomes Zaynul Abidin. The hadith, again, I believe it's by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, says that one day Shaitan said to God, he said to him, you should allow me to deceive not just your regular people, but also the best of the best. I should have, it's only fair, I should have the chance. I should have a go with these individuals. And it's a challenge that I'm happy to take. So I'm summarizing. He comes to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. The hadith says that he tried to scare the Imam at first. He came to him in the form of a snake that had 10 heads. He tried to bite the Imam. The Imam was in prayer. The Imam did not even bat an eye. Not a blink. Nothing. He kept his eyes focused on the turba, his place of prostration, and continued to pray. So the hadith says, Shaitan tried different tricks. As I said, he tried to bite the Imam's fingers. So he did a number of things, and the Imam would not give him any attention. Eventually, he stood next to the Imam, as the Imam was still in prayer. He said to him, Wallah, Shaitan, while he rejects the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't reject his existence, and he knows God's majesty and glory. So the hadith says that he said to the Imam, Wallah, by God, I have met the most devoted worshippers, min Adam famadun. I have seen them all, I have experiences with them. فَلَمْ أَرَى أَحَدًا مِثْلَكَ. I've never seen anyone like you. فَأَنْتَ حَقًّا زَيْنُ الْعَابِدِينَ. You are truly the ornament of the worshippers. The worshippers, meaning God's prophets, messengers, the Alulbayt. The Imam is an ornament for them. He's a means of beautification for them, not me and people like me. زَيْنُ الْعَابِدِينَ. And so this name was given to the Imam by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anta Zaynul Abidin. So the Imam led by example. The Imam led with worship and prayer, which unfortunately, again, a sign of our times is that worship is seasonal, it is transient, it is just a box we need to tick on the list of daily chores that we have. And this is for the most religious of us. Those who don't pray, those who don't practice, those who don't recite du'as, probably comprise the vast majority of people. But the religious ones treat acts of worship as just another box. Needs to be ticked, has to be done. I have to pray. Whereas Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, كان يصلي في اليوم والليلة 1000 ركعة. It's easier said than done, much easier. 1,000 units of prayer per day. And it's not for lack of something to keep him occupied. The Imam had a family. The Imam would conduct charitable work. The Imam would carry food and deliver it to those most in need. The Imam would spend time with his servants and train them and discipline them and provide them with the education they need to go on and become sages of themselves. The Imam had a full roster, a full schedule. And yet, to squeeze in another 1,000 units of prayer, which is why among all of the members of the Ahlul Bayt, the one who's been likened to Amir al-Mu'mineen is Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. كان أشبه الناس بأمير المؤمنين. Other members of the Ahlul Bayt, Imam al-Hussein, for example, did resemble Rasulullah, did resemble Amir al-Mu'mineen, but in certain aspects. Whereas Imam al-Hasan also, traditions tell us that he looked like Rasulullah from the waist up, right? You have others who have similarities, but the one with the greatest resemblance to Amir al-Mu'mineen was Imam al-Sajjad. Led by example, taught whenever he had the chance, and tried to completely upend the situation in his time. Which is why Sayyid Ja'far Murtada al-Amili has a book about the Imam, and the title of the book is this: Ali ibn al-Hussein, Zayn al-Abidin, Ba'ath al-Islam min Jadid. He's the one who revived Islam, brought it back to life, resuscitated the teachings of this religion which had been forgotten and destroyed. The Khulafa being complete savages and the most immoral people on the face of the planet on the one hand, people trying to imitate their political leaders, as is always the case. الناس أشبه إلى ملوكهم منهم إلى آبائهم. So when you have a corrupt government, what happens? At the bottom of the pyramid, people try to resemble. In some countries, I don't know if you've noticed, people even try to make their appearance resemble their leader. This Amir or this Sheikh or this Malik, even the way they groom their beards, they try to emulate him. They try to imitate him. That's how it is. And so in a society that's like this, from the top down, from the bottom up, it's nothing but corruption, Imam al-Sajjad comes along. And he trains the likes of Abu Khalid al-Kabuli, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, and others, Abu Hamza al-Thumali, and he provides them with a blueprint to follow and reach the highest summits of servitude to Allah, devotion to Allah, which is the very core of Islam. The Imam does that in spite of all of these challenges. I'll share one thing with you, one incident. There was a person who, you're probably familiar with the name Samarat ibn Jundub, or Jandab, whichever way you pronounce it. Samara was a vile and hateful enemy of Ali ibn Abi Talib and the Alulbayt alayhi salam, such that when he was appointed as the governor of Basra, At-Tabari says that he killed 8,000 people. Killing 8,000 people is not something you can easily wrap your head around. To the extent that, again, At-Tabari mentions this, he says that when he would leave the governor's mansion, so politicians now would probably have like a motorcade or some kind of convoy, right? They'd have, as we described earlier. The way he left the governor's mansion every day, كَأَنَّهُ فِي غَارَةٍ. He says it's like he was going on an ambush somewhere. So imagine they're riding on the backs of horses that were running in the narrow streets and alleyways of Basra. Running, sprinting. Such that not a day would pass without him killing someone on the road. So he'd be running around and hitting people بحوافر الخيول. Every day, either an old man would die, or an old woman would die, or a child who doesn't know that they're approaching. Every single day, at least, there was one casualty. This is Samarat ibn Jundub. His son was a contemporary of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. The hadith says that the Imam was sitting and he mentioned what will happen to a believer and a disbeliever when they die. So the Imam says, this is the actual hadith. It says, مَوْتُ الْفُجْأَةِ رَاحَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِ. When a believer dies unexpectedly and instantaneously, it's a means of comfort for them. Because they don't have to go through the stupor of death, sakarat al-maut. They don't have to go through, being hospitalized and receiving medical treatment and all the pain and misery that comes along with it. So when a believer dies in an unexpected manner, if they die through a heart attack or they die something that just kills them instantly, this is rahmatun lil mu'min, the Imam said. أما المنافق فموت الفجأة له حسرة. The Imam says, as for the disbeliever, the hypocrite, the kafir, he says, when he dies unexpectedly, it's a means of remorse. Because had they had the chance to fall ill and go through the process, then it would give them time to contemplate and think and figure out whether they made the right choices or not, and so they might repent. So that's a good thing for them. Instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala snatches their soul unexpectedly. So the Imam then added something. He said that because of this, when a believer is being carried by ushers or by people who are taking his casket to their grave, the believer will say to those people carrying his casket, عَجِّلُوا أَسْرِعُوا, go quickly, I'm waiting to be buried in my grave, which is Rawdatun min Riyad al-Jannah. It's a garden of paradise. So in other words, the believer is in a rush because He spent his entire life trying to prepare a good place for him to retire in. This is paradise. Whereas a kafir will keep telling the people carrying his casket to slow down. Don't go. Stop. Don't take me into my grave. Because he knows what he's prepared for himself. حُفْرَةٌ مِّنْ حُفَرِ النِّيرَانِ. This person is sitting down. He's listening to what the Imam has to say. So he makes a comment which is a mockery of the hadith of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. He said to him, if that's the case, a disbeliever would tell those carrying his casket to stop. If he could speak to them, obviously they can't hear him, but he said, if he can do that, if he recognizes and acknowledges the fact that he's going to be thrown into the fires of hell and he doesn't want to do that, then he would jump off the casket and run away. Just a really silly, stupid joke. فَضَحَكَ وَأَضْحَكَ مَنْ حَوْلَهُ. The hadith says he laughed and those around him also laughed. Ridiculing the hadith of the Imam, making a mockery of it, which, by the way, my brothers and sisters, is a dangerous and detrimental pitfall for some believers. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen, people are sitting around and they're having fun and they're joking and whatnot. Somebody mentions a hadith and they make a mockery of it. Or God forbid, some of these jokes that you sometimes hear about God. God created this and he said that, and these are incredibly detrimental things to our faith. To make a mockery of Allah, make a mockery of the Quran, make a mockery of the hadith. So he laughed and those around him laughed. So the Imam said to him, now that you have mocked the hadith of Rasulullah, may you die of burning. Excuse me, this was about his father, Samara. He died because he fell into a boiling pot. Because Rasulullah had said that the last of my companions will die from fire. He will die from burning. The Imam said to him, you've made a mockery of the hadith of Rasulullah. May Allah give you the reward that you deserve. 40 days passed, he died. His servant came to the Imam. He said to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, after just 40 days from the time he made this comment, the other day he died. My master died. And I swear to Allah that I heard him say the following: I made a mockery of the hadith of Rasulullah. Woe unto you. Speaking to himself, he's addressing himself. Woe unto you. Now you're going to a grave and all your friends have deserted you. And you're going to end up in the bottom of the fires of hell. So the Imam said, Alhamdulillah. Subhanallah. هذا جزاء من استهزأ بحديث رسول الله. This is the torment of the one who mocks the hadith of Rasulullah. Which, by the way, incidentally, the Imam did not quote Rasulullah in that hadith. The Imam simply mentioned these facts. But what he's saying is that whatever we say is equivalent to the hadith of Rasulullah. There's no difference between any member of the Alulbayt and Rasulullah when it comes to providing religious guidance and instructions. هذا جزاء من استهزأ بحديث رسول الله. We'll wrap up. One of the biggest challenges that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam faced was the fact that he was unknown. Part of the reason why he was unknown was because there was never any clear-cut instructions from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in appointing his son as his successor, as the Imam after him. Which is why Al-Shaykh Al-Saduq, Wal-Tusi, Wal-Mufid and others have said that Imamatul Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam lam takun bin nas. It wasn't because there was a clear-cut hadith. Of course there were ahadith. Of course there were instructions. But they were kept within a very closed circle. Only the closest people to Imam al-Hasan, Imam al-Hussein, Amir al-Mu'mineen knew the names of the Imams. Right? Jabir knew the names of the Imams. But these were the closest companions to them. The general public did not have any proclamations to that effect. It wasn't very clear. Instead, our scholars say that the Imam displayed and manifested his divine authority through his character, through his actions, through his supplications, through this metaphysical gravitation that people felt towards him. Like the story of the Imam going to Hajar al-Aswad in Masjid al-Haram. People simply gravitated to him. Not because they had heard Imam al-Hussein say that the Imam after me is Ali ibn al-Hussein. Why did Imam al-Hussein not make it clear to everyone? Why was there no proclamation of appointment for Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam? The answer was simple. The Imam was trying to protect Imam al-Sajjad from the tyrannical regimes of his day. And in order to do that, the Imam executed a very calculated strategy. Number one, he named all of his sons Ali. Now, this obviously muddies the waters. You don't know which Ali ibn al-Hussein is the Imam. Number two, Imam al-Hussein made statements on the day of Ashura which insinuated that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam didn't exist. Either that he wasn't there or that they had already killed him. For example, when Ali al-Akbar alayhi salatu wassalam headed towards the battlefield, Imam al-Hussein said, قَطَعَ اللَّهُ رَحِمَكَ, addressing Umar ibn Sa'd, كَمَا قَطَعْتَ رَحِمِي. May God sever your lineage just as you have severed mine. Now, what does this suggest to them? That after Ali al-Akbar, Imam al-Hussein doesn't have any children. It's an insinuation. It's an innuendo. It's not very clear. But again, the Imam was planting these thoughts in their head to distract them from killing Imam Zayn al-Abidin. That's number one. Number two, when he took Ali al-Asghar to be quenched with water, what did the Imam say? Ya qawm, laqad qataltum akhi wa awladi wa ashabi wa lam yabqa illa hadha al-radhi'. You have killed my brother, you have killed my children, my sons, you have killed my companions, and all I have left is this. Again, insinuating that Imam al-Sajjad wasn't there. Which is why I feel that when we speak about Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, we have to speak about Ali al-Akbar. The reason was that in order to protect the life of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, a big sacrifice had to be made. And that was Ali al-Akbar. Remember that they were confused when Ibn Marjana addressed Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam and said, what is your name? He said, Ali ibn al-Hussein. So Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad's response was that there was another Ali ibn al-Hussein, وَقَدْ قَتَلَهُ اللَّهُ. Who's that? Again, the idea was that we had already killed the successor of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So the Imam said to him, كَانَ لِي أَخٌ يُسَمَّى علي ibn al-Hussein وَقَدْ قَتَلَهُ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يَتَوَفَّى الْأَنفُسِ. It was the people who killed him. God didn't kill him. Yes, I had a brother whose name was Ali ibn al-Hussein. Ibn Marjana was shocked because again, he thought that we had killed Ali ibn al-Hussein who would succeed Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in his imamah and therefore end the lineage of Rasulullah and therefore prevent the emergence of the Mehdi. As Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam clearly says. He says, the reason لَقَدْ وَضَعَ بَنُو أُمَيَّةَ لَقَدْ وَضَعَ بَنُو أُمَيَّةَ وَبَنُو الْعَبَّاسِ فِينَا سُيُوفَهُمْ, for two reasons, one of which was in order to prevent the Mahdi from coming. So the only way was to sever the lineage. The only way was the slogan that they uttered on the day of Ashura, لا تبقوا لأهل هذا البيت من باقية. The massacre of the day of Ashura was nothing short of a genocide. The idea was to completely obliterate the family of Rasulullah from the face of existence. Hence the killing of the infant. Hence the killing of the children. 17 children of Imam al-Hussein were killed under the hooves of the horses on the day of Ashura. And so suddenly Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam emerges and they feel that they missed him. They couldn't kill him. Now, of course, some might say that, well, why didn't they kill him then? How was he protected? And the answer lies in the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا لَنَنْصُرُ رُسُلَنَا وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْأَشْهَادِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the mother of Musa, أَلْقِيهِ فِي الْيَمِّ لَا تَخَافِي لَا تَحْزَنِي إِنَّا رَادُّوهُ إِلَيْكِ. We'll bring him back to you. Allah said about Yusuf, وَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. Allah will protect them. Ibrahim, Ya naru kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Allah, when He needs to protect His vicegerents, He will move heaven and earth to make sure they're protected, that they're safeguarded. Now that they had missed the opportunity to kill Imam Zayn al-Abidin in Karbala, they couldn't do it afterwards. The tables had turned. Everyone was now crying in Kufa and Sham. They were crying for Imam al-Hussein. They couldn't just take the Imam and execute him. But a big sacrifice had to be made. And that was Ali al-Akbar. In a way, Ali al-Akbar was killed to protect Imam al-Sajjad. Ana Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Ali. He even identifies himself. He says, come and get me. In other words, the Imam is saying, leave my brother alone. Leave the Imam alone. And so he heads towards the battlefield. Then, after a while, he comes back to his father. Perhaps to give him some comfort. Perhaps to remind him that I'm still alive. But what he says to his father is even more heart-shattering. He says, and this is me rephrasing his statement. He says, Father, I am on this battlefield and I resemble your father Ali ibn Abi Talib. You don't need to worry about me from these enemies. I will protect myself. I will fight as you expect me to fight. However, in harra al-hadid, my father, if something's going to kill me, it is the heat, it is the unbearable thirst. Inna al-atasha qad qatalani wa harra al-hadid qad ajhadani. I might die of thirst. If you see me dying, then it's because of the thirst. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says something to him, which is by far the most painful thing a father would have to say to his child. He says to him, if you want to be quenched of thirst, the only way is this. فَمَا هِيَ إِلَّا سَاعَةٌ فَيَسْقِيكَ جَدُّكَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ مِنْ كَأْسِهِ الْأَوْفَى الَّذِي لَنْ تَظْمَأَ بَعْدَهُ أَبَدًا. It's only a matter of an hour or so. Your grandfather will quench your thirst. He will make you drink from his eternal cup, after which you will never feel any thirst. And so he heads back into the battle, but because the enemy thought that they were killing the Imam after Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the way they ambushed him was truly unique. The only description that I can provide, that historians have given us, which would give us a glimpse of what they did to Ali al-Akbar, was this: فَقَطَّعُوهُ إِرَبًا إِرَبًا. They cut him into pieces, 30,000 of them converging on the one that Imam al-Hussein called أشبه الناس خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا برسولك, the one who resembles your messenger and your prophet. No one resembled Rasulullah, not even Imam al-Hasan, not even Imam al-Hussein, not any member of the Alulbayt more than Ali al-Akbar. خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا برسولك. This is how you treat the one who looks like Rasulullah on the battlefield. فقطعوه إربا إربا. Abu Abdullah heard his son's cry. He said to him, أبا عليك من السلام. In other words, he wants to comfort Abu Abdullah. He says to him, I came to you saying I'm thirsty. Well, you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm no longer thirsty, my father. فهذا جدي رسول الله قد سقاني بكأسه الأوفى الذي لا أظمأ بعده أبدا. But he has a message for you, my father. ويقول إن لك كأسا مدخورا. He has a cup waiting for you. Abu Abdullah rushed to him كالصقر المنقض على فريق. فريسته, like an eagle descending upon its prey. The Imam came to him, but how did he see his son Ali al-Akbar? Instead of disembarking from his horse, فرمى بنفسه على ولد بني علي على الدنيا بعدك العفا. أما أنت فقد استرحت من هم الدنيا وغمها، وبقي أبوك لهمها وغمها. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون، والعاقبة للمتقين. إلهنا سيدنا مولانا، نسألك اللهم باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم، يا الله 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 يا أرحم الراحمين، عجل اللهم فرج إمام زماننا يا الله. اجعلنا من خيرة أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة الحسين، وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين، واحشرنا مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين. اللهم اشف مرضانا، أد ديوننا، اقض حوائجنا، ارحم موتانا ومن مضى من شيعة أمير المؤمنين والعلماء والصالحين والشهداء وخدمة أبي عبد الله الحسين، ومن مضى من هذا الجمع. إلى أرواحهم نهدي ثواب المجلس وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.